I have to give credit where credit is due. I thought the Pittsburgh Steelers were going to be more of the same that they've been the past couple of seasons here in 2014. I thought they were going to be an 8-8 team that would lose to some teams they had no business losing to and wouldn't beat nearly enough good teams to really make a difference and really matter all that much. Well, I was surprised a little bit. The Steelers were much better than I had predicted. Now, don't get me wrong, in some ways, they were still the same Pittsburgh Steelers of the past few years. And when you look at the Steelers, you can look at one in particular characteristic that they have and blame that in part for what happened to them in their wild card round loss to the Baltimore Ravens. This is a Steelers team that still lost to some crappy teams in 2014. They lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, for crying out loud, the team with the #1 overall pick in the draft. They lost to the fucking Jets, for God's sakes, a team with the 6th overall pick. So two of their opponents that they lost to this year, 2 of their 5 losses came against teams with a combined 6 wins. They had another loss against the New Orleans Saints. The Saints. Yeah, the Saints, another team that didn't have a winning record. Same thing with the Cleveland Browns. Losing to these non-playoff teams has been a real Achilles heel and bugaboo of these Mike Tomlin coached Pittsburgh Steelers teams in recent years, and it very well could have been again this year. And in fact, when you look at the fact that they still won the AFC North and finished 11-5 in spite of that, it's kind of surprising. What happens if they even beat 2 of those teams? Let's say they still lose to the Browns the one time they did, and they lose to the Saints. If they beat the Bucks and the freaking Jets, you're talking about a Steelers team that is 13-3 and has home field advantage throughout the playoffs. Furthermore, if they found a way to maybe beat the Bucks, the Jets, and either the Saints or Browns, you're talking about a 14-2 team that heads into week 17 already 13-2, already having cinched up potentially home field advantage throughout the playoffs, where they maybe don't need to play Le'Veon Bell as much, therefore he doesn't get injured in week number 17, and God only knows what happens. The biggest difference for the Pittsburgh Steelers team in 2014 was the fact that they were able to beat a lot of quality opponents. Houston, Kansas City, those are teams with winning records at 9-7 that missed the playoffs. Baltimore, Indianapolis, teams that made the playoffs and won each at least a playoff game. They beat the Bengals twice. So you think about it, this is a team that went 4-2 in the division, and they had 3, 4, 5, 6 victories over teams with a winning record. So in years past, they lost to too many bad teams, which frankly they did again this year, but the biggest difference was they beat more quality opponents than they have in years past. A big reason for that was the explosion of this Steelers offense under Todd Haley as the coordinator. Sorry, Snoop, he did a hell of a job this year. Big Ben played at a near MVP level. You could argue that Le'Veon Bell, perhaps arguably the best all-around running back in the National Football League, or one of them for sure, one of the most versatile weapons at that position in the National Football League, himself also played at a, you could say an MVP type of level, an all-pro type of level. And then you've got Antonio Brown, who, if he had more media buzz behind him with the quality and consistency of his play, who to me has not only established himself maybe as the best wide receiver in the National Football League, but himself had maybe a case for being the NFL's most valuable player. This was an elite, explosive, big play Pittsburgh Steelers offense. Eventually, once they realized how stupid they were being by not playing Martavis Bryant. When they played Martavis Bryant, this offense took off and went to a whole different level. He's big, can jump and run. Let's throw him the ball a few freaking times a game and see what happens. He's what Lima Swede was supposed to be in many levels. And that's what they did. And in particular to me, once they started playing Bryant and once they got him involved in the offense, it just changed the game and took this offense to a whole different elite type of level. That was very surprising that I didn't anticipate the Steelers offense being able to do under Todd Haley in 2014. The problem is, though, is that this Pittsburgh Steelers defense, really started to show that they're not the Steelers defense that you identify with when it comes to this organization. They were not nearly the same type of defense. And I know so many fans probably are upset about the fact that Dick LeBeau has left. He's gone. But maybe you shouldn't be. And maybe that's not the case. Maybe I'm misreading it. Maybe a lot of Steeler fans understand that just because the guy's been great for many years doesn't necessarily mean that he is now. And in fact, perhaps the biggest burden or hindrance to getting better on that defensive side of the ball and those Steelers defenses playing like the Steelers defenses of old was Dick LeBeau. Because there's years of neglecting the secondary, which you can sit there and blame on the front office all you want, but that is a de-emphasis that comes from the head coach and the defensive coordinator. And those years of neglecting the secondary really caught up with them. Polamalu's old. Mike Mitchell sucks. Cortez Allen sucks. I mean, they're just terrible. And not only that, they really have failed in recent years to get big-time pass rushers on the outside for a Steelers defense that is so predicated on their linebackers in that 3-4 that has spent 3 first-round picks in recent seasons on linebackers in that 3-4. They have very little pass rush to show for it out of those linebackers in that 3-4, in particular on the outside. Jason World's a former third-round pick, is an average player. Jarvis Jones missed a good portion of the season due to injury, and what did it really matter anyways? It's not like he's getting any pass rush anyways, even when he is playing. It's those years of neglecting the secondary. It's those years of failing to get big-time pass rushers to replace the James Harrisons and the Lamar Woodleys of the world that ultimately caught up with the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was the arrogance of belief in the system and the X's and O's being more important than the Jimmys and Joes that really, frankly, caught up with them. And I do think philosophically that maybe that is in part due to Dick LeBeau, and as a result, maybe it was time for a change, and it was time for him to go, frankly. Because for this Steelers team, coming off an 11-5 season, there probably should be a whole lot more optimism about the Steelers team than there really is. But until they fix those deficiencies on the defensive side of the ball, in particular in the back eight of their defense, they're not going to go anywhere other than this would be what they did in 2014 is going to be the ceiling for what they could do. In terms of their team needs in this offseason, especially when it comes to the NFL draft, which is where the Steelers are going to try and address their needs, which is what they need to do. They need to be need-based drafted. They need to be. This best player available shit in this particular draft is the wrong way to go for the Pittsburgh Steelers, in my opinion. Here is what the first 5 rounds of their draft should look like in some way, shape, or form. Secondary player, secondary player, secondary player, secondary player, outside linebacker, period. Don't address the offense. You don't need to. Because that offense was elite this past season as it was. You still got Big Ben. You still got Le'Veon Bell. You still got Antonio Brown. You've got Martavis Bryant. You've got Marcus Wheaton as a nice kind of number 3 option. You don't really need to address that offense. For you to take that next step as an organization, you need to do what I've talked about for years, which is address that defensive side of the ball, in particular the freaking secondary. Stop drafting the Jarvis Joneses of the world. Start drafting the Ryan Shaziers of the world and draft for that fucking secondary. Ladies and gentlemen, what was the last time the Pittsburgh Steelers drafted a corner in the first round? I believe you have to go back to like 1997. It was Chad Scott. The only other defensive back they've taken in the first round over the past 15 years was Troy Polamalu, who they made a big move up the board for, if I remember correctly, in 2003 to get him out of USC. It took him 16th overall. That's how long it's been. After these years of this neglect of the secondary, this criminal neglect of this secondary, it has truly caught up to them over the past few seasons. It really caught up to them in the 2014 season, and the Steelers must realize the error of their ways, realize that their system on defense isn't as star-spangled awesome as they believe, that it's not just about the X's and O's. It is, in fact, about the Jimmys and Joes, and therefore they must address the secondary early and often. If they go into this draft and they don't get 2 corners and 2 safeties in the first 4 to 5 rounds, then something is wrong with this equation here. You look at the corners and safeties available in round 1, and you pick whichever one is the best available out of all of them. Then you do the same shit again in round 2, round 3, potentially even round 4 and or 5. That's how bad this secondary is. That's how old this secondary is. They need youth, they need talent, they need depth, they need every fucking thing in that secondary. Any Steelers fan with a brain knows this. Any NFL fan that can watch this team knows this. Anybody that disagrees with this is a fucking moron. The only thing you could say that they would need, that you would have to maybe in this particular draft, because of the quality of talent in that particular area, the Steelers would need to address somewhere in the first 2 to 3 rounds, would be an edge rusher. And I would not begrudge you for saying that. They need to mix one of them in. Hell, at this point in time, they're so bad at that position too, you could argue they need 2 of them. But they must address that secondary. That first round pick must be a corner or not a safety. If they don't do that because they felt they got a pass rusher that actually can rush the passer, then it has to be the second, third, fourth, fifth round priority. They must fix this secondary. They must fix their pass rush. Nothing else matters at this point in time. Nothing else needs to be in consideration for being addressed. No more going out there and overpaying for Mike Mitchells. No more extending guys that can't play to ridiculously stupid deals. They must get it done, and they must get it done right. And for a Steelers team that for so many years has understood the importance of building through the draft and having a next man up philosophy, when you look at their secondary and when you look at their outside linebackers in the 3-4, they don't have anybody up in the next man up category. And that must be changed, and that must be addressed this offseason if this Steelers team is going to take that next step and become a Super Bowl contender in 2015.